Net. It has been a while and a day since I've had this guy on. He is one of our favorite guests to have on. I generally only have him on like 2 or 3 times a year, and that's usually right around the time the MASN story gets kicked further down the curb. It has been the story that has brought Eric Fisher and I so close, and I feel like I got to know him a little bit in his reporting at the Washington Times a generation ago when he was reporting on the Montreal Expos moving to the District to become said Washington Nationals. As the Mid-Atlantic Sports Network turns, we welcome Eric Fisher, a defending champion around here. You can find him at Eric Fisher SBJ. I enjoyed the Major League Baseball All-Star Game with him in Nationals Park last summer, and now we find out we've been passed over again. The Angelos family treated unfairly again, Eric. They're putting the All-Star Game in Philly in 5 years, right?
Yeah, actually 7. The idea is to tie into the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. It's a bit of an unusual step to make an announcement so far out. I mean, we don't even know where the 2021 game is going to be yet, but the idea here is to almost kind of serve notice to every other league and organizing body to try to do as many other events in Philly that same year and really make that 250th just a massive year-long thing.
Well, I remember 1976 was a big deal, back in my childhood, and the All-Star Game was there, so baseball had a little bit of a history there, so that's cool. So what you're saying to me is we still have a chance to get the All-Star Game before Philly gets it. Is that what you're saying? There's an out. Well, I mean, if the Angelos family's not involved.
There are 5 years unaccounted. There's 21 through 25 that have yet to be assigned. So, there are several teams in the mix there, the Cubs, Rangers, Braves, but could the Orioles slide in there? Potentially.
All right, so that's July of 2026. I'm trying to figure out where the Orioles franchise will be then. And look, and this is a long tail, and we've started to talk about it for real here because we have a lot of elements here, Eric, that are a mess, right? First off, the upside-down nature of everything we're about to discuss with MASN and the Nationals and where's the money and where did the money go, and the Nationals haven't gotten any of it, the Major League Baseball partners haven't gotten it. But no one's going to the games. They've alleged this rebuild, which may take 5 years of empty stadiums. We have a city that is in turmoil with a mayor and no money and no Fortune 500 companies, fans that don't want to come downtown to see the games. You remember the vibrant Camden Yards, and I know of your love of baseball and your love of the Orioles, quite frankly, and coming down and being a part of all the Cal Ripken stuff so many years ago. All that's like a rear-view mirror now, and all we have is the windshield. And the windshield is we have these 2 kids that own the team who don't really know what to do with it. They can't even keep the management around at this point. They're going to lose 100 games for the foreseeable future, and the lease is up in 2.5 years. And that's the scariest part. And all of this MASN money is this sort of incredible nest egg that they've banked for a dozen years now that everyone's coming out of the hills to try to take from them in their eyes, right?
So, yeah, there's a lot of different things out there. I don't think anything sort of happens imminently, but a lot of what you kind of speak to is the need for real progressive public visionary leadership. And that's not just the ball club, but that's certainly part of it. And, the commissioner has been leaning on that family to what's the situation here, and what he would like to ideally see is either they make a decision like the Nationals and just formally pass control of the franchise to the next generation, and if that's not going to happen, maybe it's time to talk about a sale or some other option. But this kind of current status quo where Peter is ailing and getting older, obviously, and not visible, but still is technically in control of the team, that's not a long-term tenable solution. So that's number one. And I think the other things you kind of speak to, just in terms of your political leadership and so forth, there's need for improvement there too. And I think there's a lot of things that if we can get some more public, visible, progressive leadership, perhaps some of these factors can start to turn around. But that's a lot of big ifs there.
Well, yeah, and listen, I'm doing Baltimore Positive here. Quite frankly, I'm going to not talk as much about the baseball team. Eric, no one cares. I mean, have you seen the lineup? Have you seen these names? Have you seen what they want us to come down? People don't want to come downtown to begin with, right? So then we have that on top of it, which is really an unwatchable kind of product from a here and now go to the ballpark to see a team that I want to put a jersey on and root for players and be into it. We're going to see that sort of evaporate a little bit. And the MASN story unto itself, it's such a large amount of money. There's so many sort of broken rules in all of this. Where do you see it right now? Because I think you share a unique eyeballs on this like I do over the course of now 2 decades of watching it and saying, I don't even know what to compare it to, but I do know it's put a lot of things in peril around here, you know?
Well, while that's happened, nothing has really fundamentally changed. I guess, at the risk of sounding a little flip here, to answer your question, not really much is fundamentally different than, say, 6 months or a year ago. And even this latest bid over the profit distributions, that's really a sideshow to the core rights fee debate. It's a very, very small amount of money, less than $10 million compared to the hundreds of millions of dollars in really kind of the long-term kind of direction of the franchise, both franchises, that's at play with the rights fee dispute in and of itself. So this whole profit distribution thing that's going on right now and was just sent to neutral arbitration, that's really just kind of a sideshow, and it's really noise that doesn't detract from the core debate. And the core debate is still what it is, that the Orioles believe that the deal that they made in 2005 has not been honored, and it needs to be honored. The Nationals believe that they're not getting anywhere close to market rate rights fees, and we have these two diametrically opposed views that remain in full collision with each other, just as they have been. And that's frustrating for any fan or really any observer, because amid all of this legal machination, that core schism hasn't changed. And I don't see how it does change anytime in the near future.
Well, I mean, what's Rob Manfred's role in all of this? You know, I'm inking a Dear John and Lou Angelos letter like I did last year. Apparently the guy I wrote the letter to who was running the team isn't anymore. It's going to be even more chaotic when they're 20 games under 500 instead of just 5 under or whatever it's going to be by the weekend. But we know the team can't compete. They're not even trying. They're much more concerned with the number 1 draft pick. But in settling this thing and getting some sort of a vision for what they're going to do as a business on a lease for the franchise, that wasn't the stuff I was on fire about 24 months ago, Eric. But it feels like, I've been knowing you a long time, and you've been at this a long time. And I remember Bud Selig putting the gavel down in 2014. I mean, isn't Rule 1, term 1, we don't sue each other? Wasn't that sort of the gentleman's agreement inside of this? And the fact that it's gotten this wildfiery out years and years and years later, isn't this unsettling to the rest of the baseball owners to say, come on, man, you're letting the franchise rot? And I'm a little concerned that 3 or 4 years from now, this franchise is going to be very attractive in Nashville, or for my buddy Maury Brown out in Portland, or, wherever, that it will be very easy to just say, we'll just move the team. You guys have the Nationals now. See you later.
Yeah, Rob's in kind of a difficult spot because he really kind of got embarrassed a bit during the prior legal round of the MASN fight in and of itself, where the court really found that he and the league were sort of operating in an improper fashion. So within that construct in and of itself, he's really now in this sort of second phase of internal arbitration for the rights fees. He's really trying to take a step back, at least publicly, and not have as much of a visible role on that. Your other point, though, is he does have a responsibility, just like any commissioner, to help. Any sports league is only as strong as its weakest link, and part of his job, just like those in the other leagues, is to help those small market franchises have a strategy to succeed. And I think ideally what you'd want over time is a situation like a Milwaukee or even a Kansas City. Now Kansas City's rebuilding, but they just had a pretty good run there and went to 2 World Series, won one of them. Milwaukee's in the smallest media market in the league. They're thriving and they're drawing almost $3 million, and they've got progressive ownership and on down the line. And there are things that the league can do to, whether it be to, best practices, helping with hiring, helping with policy things, certainly the revenue sharing piece. There's a variety of things that can be done to help prop up these smaller markets. And I do think that Rob's got a role there going forward to help ensure that this team remains as strong as it can be, even as it goes through this on-field rebuild.
Eric Fisher is our guest. He is Eric Fisher, SBJ. That is the Sports Business Journal. He is an OG reporter in the area, covering all things Nationals and Orioles and Expos and MASN, and I always try to stay up with him on all of this stuff. What do you make of modern baseball as it changes? I mean, I was out on opening day. There were 10,000 empty seats. They forced the media to call it a sellout. It was nothing like a sellout. People couldn't even get into the stadium. And then there's part of it with the shifting and the Chris Davis part of this and who these players are, that there's, in my market, where lacrosse is readily available and we have a beach 2 hours that way and mountains 2 hours that way and boats coming up the bay and all these other things that could distract you away from baseball here. Part of it is the game itself, right? And trying to figure out how this analytics that's made the game so razor sharp from an evaluative standpoint but not so good for a guy like me who shows up on opening day and sees guys moving around and sees all these adjustments that don't necessarily make the game more interesting, more fun, more jovial, more, engaging. More something that feels like a good investment of 3 hours of my day when my team's going to lose 105 games this year,
Yeah, this is really probably the top of what Rob Manfred and company are working on right now, is trying to thread that needle in terms of making that game as attractive as possible, compete in an entertainment marketplace that you speak to where there's more options and choices for people's free time than ever, both online and offline, and make this game as progressive and as attractive as it can be while still respecting its traditions and history. That's not an easy thing, but that sort of large-scale question is really the biggest thing that they're working on right now. I think there are, writ large across the league, I think it's still in a fundamentally healthy place. Revenues are still strong, even though attendance was down a little bit last year. I think they're potentially poised for a rebound this year. But there's also still some work to do to make that game attractive and more attractive and get away from this 3 true outcome thing. And I think the shift is partially indicative of that, but just to have more balls in play and get away from just this strikeout walk home run thing, which appears to be continuing from last year into this season so far. That's a big thing that they're trying to do, and very much a work in progress.
My dad thought the DH was sort of heresy, and maybe it was just because Tommy Davis was the Orioles' first DH, and, my dad expected better than that. He wanted some Gates Brown or something like that. I'm not sure, but I went on the radio in 1991, and we were talking about dump the DH back then and the bumper stickers that crazy guy in Boston had. I'm sure you remember all that. And here all these years later, the National League's still playing these rules. We have this pitch clock thing we're talking about now. The York Revolution are playing all these new rules. Luke wants to take me up to York to watch the new rules of baseball and all this stuff. I don't know. They're going to be doing lots of things to sort of save it, give it a shot in the arm. I mean, in 1973 they did that, the dead ball era of the late 60s. I know you're a great historian of the game. The game has evolved. It's changed. Guys were sticking needles in their arms in bathroom stalls back at the turn of the century when I was around the game, and some of them are still running the game at this point. But this is going to be a different game 5 years from now, right? And part of this is they're about to go to war again, the Major League Baseball Players Association and the owners. And we've had peacetime here recently that I didn't have the first 15 years of my radio career, where we were in the middle of strikes in 94 and canceling World Series and all that. But boy, watching Adam Jones try to get a job and watching what happened with the Machado, Harper, and now even Trout sweepstakes, it's a different kind of game on the business side, and they're really going to test the bellies of these young men to see if they're going to fight for their right to party or whatever, poignant thing you want me to say about their money, because there's going to be a fight, and the owners are sort of laying down the law for a war here as I see it.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see, and I clearly the game has been moving towards younger talent for some time now and getting away from paying big money for those over 30 free agents because the track record is such that it just doesn't pay off. And there's so much in terms of analytics and math and modeling that you can see that it doesn't pay off. So clearly, I think both sides recognize that there needs to be a shift of the money more towards the younger players. The question for the union is what can they give up? Let's say you move the sliders for arbitration and free agent instead of that 4 and 7 years. You move those sliders down, and then that's a good thing for the players. What do they have to give of commensurate value to make that horse trade ostensibly? And that's the issue that the union finds itself in, that unified or not, they don't have a lot to give to the owners because the owners have kind of outflanked them, outsmarted them, out-resourced them and everything. And, which is part of why we see all this issue with guys not getting signed and this rush towards all these pre-arbitration, pre-free agency extensions and so forth. But, the big question that I've got as we head towards the next round of labor negotiation is just what do the players have to give to horse trade with? And I'm not sure that they have a lot in their arsenal right now.
Eric Fisher is our guest. You can always read his work and his tweets out on Twitter at Eric Fisher, SBJ, that's Sports Business Journal. No one covering the game of baseball on the business side better than he. I try to bring all my expert buddies on for all things MASN to make sure we're getting the real story. Eric, just to keep it local from my perspective and where my head has been, and I've been obsessed with this with the Peter Principles, and now we're seeing, 2,000 and 3,000 people, Expos kinds of crowds, to start the season, even on 80-degree nights in the early going, and how bad the team is going to be, that remains to be seen. It's just a level of how bad, whether it's 95 or 105, whatever it is. But the real concern for me locally is where the revenue and the money is going to come from to save this franchise, right? So that means skyboxes, selling tickets at their price point, what they're going to want from the Stadium Authority for, retrofitting the ballpark for 2030 and not 1992 as you and I remember it, all the open airways, all the things that go on, plus the villages that now you see at Wrigley Field where they own all the parking, they own the bars, they own 3 blocks, they sell condos, the Atlanta model where they move out to the Beltway to essentially Owings Mills and they get a whole city gifted them and a bank puts their name on it and they get, all sorts of, a mall essentially, a neighborhood they develop. All of that's going on, and I know you're about to report on not just the All-Star game in Philly, but London and international baseball and Monterey and where the money and opening their seasons in Sydney, Australia, and opening in Japan this year with Ichiro, which was a wonderful thing to witness, but nobody knew it was going on until after it had happened. But where the money is, where Rob Manfred and these guys smell money, I'm really worried that it's not at the Inner Harbor anymore. You know what I mean?
Well, I think the play for them, for the Orioles, then again, getting back to my original point about having sort of really visible, prominent, progressive leadership, I think this real estate play that you reference, I think is a real key for them, that most of the other teams around the league have gotten into this in a very big way, and the Braves are certainly probably the most prominent example, but the Rangers, the Cardinals, the Cubs, a number of other teams have gotten into this in a very big way, and I'm not sure exactly what the land opportunities near or adjacent to the stadium are, but you talk about sort of future revenue sources. This is something that a lot of the teams have gotten very interested in, done very well with, and this is all because it's not direct game revenue. This is not subject to revenue sharing, so this is stuff that they all get to keep for themselves. And public sectors have been very willing to go right along because you get sort of a quick bang of development often in a blighted area or an underdeveloped area. You boost the tax base, and then you get this critical mass of activity. And I've been to Atlanta now 3 times, none of which during an actual Braves game, and it's teeming with activity. And it's just even on a random off-season weeknight, there's 3-4 other events going on at all times, and so the Orioles are never going to have something quite to the scale of the Battery, but if you're really sort of thinking about what the next phase of leadership and ownership post Peter is going to be, that would probably be right at the top of my suggestion list, is to start moving in that direction and try to create some sort of Orioles Disneyland, so to speak.
Eric, you dream the orange dream here for all of us in Baltimore. Hey, enjoying the season? Machado in San Diego, right? Bryce Harper in Philly. The Mariners get off to a good start. The Padres get off to a good start. And the Red Sox and the Yankees sort of stink out of the gate. Cubs, too. I mean, it's an interesting start to the season for the league.
So, and I think even your guys, I know you're very pessimistic, and I get it. And last year's results give plenty of indication why. But having watched all those games they played against the Yankees, they were pretty much in all of them, and they were very plucky. And this may be, it would not surprise. I mean, listen, they're not going to contend or anything like that, but they've been hovering around second place for a good chunk of the season, and it wouldn't surprise me if they, instead of it being 105, 110 losses, maybe it's something like 75 and 87 or something like that. I think much like possibly.
I think they need a lot more quad A players. They need a lot more big league players than what I've seen, certainly pitching. Like after the sixth inning, you can almost assure they're going to give up 3 to 5 runs, literally, every night.
But there's no pressure. This is the thing. And I had a similar conversation with Derek Jeter and company relative to what they're trying to do in Miami. And this was something I was working on during the offseason. And I think really what they're trying for, and I think a similar thing could be said for the Orioles, is to just get some flashes of excitement, find potentially 2 or 3 players that could be the new base to rally around. And yes, this year is going to be a tough year, whether it's 75 wins or only 55 wins, but just to try to find some kind of toehold to take into 20 and 21. And that would be the goal, and that would be probably some version of success for the season. But again, 2 weeks into the season, pitching issues notwithstanding, there's been at least some pluck with this Orioles team, which has been interesting to see.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the Miami Marlins because, we're clearly doing the Astro Ball thing here, and we talked to Sig Mejdal and all that and heard everything Mike Elias has had to say. So the fans that are, bought in and watching what's going on at Delmarva and Bowie and, through the pipeline, they're all bought in. But I'm trying to think, where's the parallel? Boy, I'm looking at this Miami Marlins team. It's like, oh, my God, they're as completely as anonymous as the Orioles are at this point, right?
Yeah, and the issue with the Marlins is that they are competing in arguably the toughest division in baseball, where you've got 4 other teams in that division, all of which with significant October aspirations. And already, as we've seen, they're just pounding the you-know-what out of each other every single day, and all sorts of last-minute walk-offs and extra-inning games. And this is how it's going to be with those 4 other teams in the NL East. I don't think you just have that kind of top-to-bottom level of depth and competition in the AL East, largely because of Toronto being in a similar rebuilding state and the Yankees being so dinged up early on. But, that NL East is just brutal.
Makes a guy like me want to say poor Wei-Yin Chen, and then I realize there's nothing poor about Wei-Yin Chen. So, so he's there amidst all that. It's like saying poor Chris Davis. I mean, there was a point where you almost said poor Chris Davis until you realized that's a little bit of an oxymoron, right?
Yeah, but given where he was at the time, I mean, that was market value. I mean, this is just going to be one of those unfortunate historical things that, we've seen guys fall off the table, perhaps not quite as dramatically and with this kind of financial impact, but unfortunately it does happen. And this is the thing about baseball, that you're already dealing with a failure-based game, and then sometimes these things, guys just lose it. I mean, I don't have to tell your market about Steve Dalkowski way back when. I mean, he
the flamethrower.
Exactly. And things happen, unfortunately.
Boy, Wei-Yin Chen's making $20 million. It is guaranteed $22 million next year. Maybe, I don't know, man. Maybe there's a Chris Davis deal to be made there. Eric, take care of yourself. Love following your work. Always appreciate you taking our call and coming on and trying to clarify and talk me out of the tree. But, keep your eye on the Orioles. We all will be,
No doubt.
Eric Fisher, SBJ, the way to follow him out on the Twitter thing. He's at Sports Business Journal doing digital media technology and a lot of baseball out at SBJ and sportsbusinessjournal.com. You can find me out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We come in crystal clear. The kids call it podcasting. Got all sorts of stuff up there this week across all sorts of spectrum of sports. We are about to launch Baltimore Positive in May. I'll be telling you more about that and trying to make the city better because it's really, really important. Nasty at WNST.net is the perfect way to find me, and I'm on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram and streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports and Baltimore positive.